The Earnestly Speaking podcast is a show that is founded on free-flowing conversation and may at times venture into mature subjects. Listener discretion is advised.
Earnestly Speaking podcast coming to you on July 6, 2022. How you guys doing? I literally just finished wrapping up a near 2-hour NBA off-season marathon podcast with my friends Zach and Chris, the degenerate himself, and Chris Manico. I still need to give a nickname. And I was like, I want to do a solo podcast, but I'm tired. But you know what? Let me get in now because I know I am off tomorrow from work, but I also don't want to be doing anything. I mean, I have to do my Take the Wrestling podcast at night, but I don't want to be doing the extra around that. I want to be able to spend my day with my family all day tomorrow and all that. But I also want to do a solo podcast for a couple of days now. So a lot of stuff I want to talk about. So, you do the things that you love. You do the things that make you happy. So even though I'm really tired, I'm dragging ass now to do this podcast. At the same time, like, you know what? Yes, let's push it to the middle. I have another hour or two before my wife gets home from work. My kids are asleep right now. I don't work tomorrow. So the whole day ahead of me, I have the next 48 hours ahead of me of no distractions, whatever it may be. So let's just take advantage of that, So I'm doing that now. So am I tired? Yes, I am. But I'm happy. I'm able to do things I love, and we just go from there. I said that podcast will drop tomorrow, most like after this episode drops. The NBA off-season wrap up. Well, if we want to call it that, it will be probably our last full NBA episode. We'll do in a while. Probably till October when we do our over-unders, our annual over-unders for the NBA season, for next year, which will only be like 3 months away from now. Let's see. So a couple things to get into. Try to keep it around 30 minutes, if not less. Lately, I've had a lot of issues with my back again. I've had this issue for a while, off and on. Obviously my job, I'm a poker dealer, so I love my job. But the one part of my job that seems to be the thing that I can't seem to break through, and a lot of it's my fault because of the way I eat. I should be eating a lot better, cleaner. I'll drink more water, stay more hydrated. Is the physical part of it is hard, and not just with my back, but also with my arms to some degree. Last year, remember, I started getting massages from one of my best friends. She had me on a regimen. We were doing it every week, every 2 weeks, doing massages, and it's actually a lot of help. But she recently moved away about a few months ago to North Florida. So I lost my connect or my contact for someone who I trust to do my massages. Because she not only was a great masseuse, she also helped me in learning how to stretch, which muscles, especially the muscles that I tend to use the most when it comes to my job, and learning how to take care of my muscles, encouraging me to drink more water, eat healthy, and all that. And I've been trying to do that to some degree, but then of course you don't think about these things. You just go with the flow. And lately, back issues for me has always been something I've always dealt with to some degree. Upper back, I have no problem with. I can deal with my back being tight because it's part of the job. You're pitching cards and you whatnot. It's gonna get to you at some point. But lately, it's been my lower back and it's been my shoulder, especially too. My shoulder, especially too, but my lower back has been an issue lately. So I've been trying to, be more consistent with stretching. Something I don't do every day. I don't do enough. I've been taking more magnesium, especially too. It's good for my joints and all that. Good for my muscles. Trying to stay consistent with that as well too. But it's one of those things where it's like if you're not on top of it and you don't take care of it, it's gonna kill you. And not say kill like death was, but it restricts me. And it's one of those things where it's like, oh God, I'm 42 years old. Like, can I keep doing this job? And I love my job. I really love my job. I've been in my job 19 years. But can I keep doing this job, in the same way with all this pain and the somewhat restrictions on my back and to some degree my arms and my muscles. So I have to get back to a regimen where I'm starting to stretch again, taking it more seriously, eating better. So a lot of that stuff I know I can control, and I should be able to control. But at the same time, it's like I need to put it to action, put a call to action on that one, and I need to work on that. Now I do have I did find another friend of mine, friend of my family's that offered to start massaging my back as well too. So I'm gonna probably end up using her very soon to work on my back and my shoulders, especially my shoulders, which has been a major issue the last couple of weeks. I think this injury in my shoulder was not actually work related. Actually, I think I got it from sleeping on the wrong side of the bed longer than I was supposed to, and then blah, So the shoulder was an issue, but I need to start working on that, and that's something I need to really take more seriously. Like I said, I'm not getting any younger. Not getting any younger. I'm 42 and I'm getting older, and there are days. It's funny. I've lost a lot of weight in the last couple of years. By intermittent fasting. I told you guys in this podcast that intermittent fasting has been a thing that I've been really taking seriously, and it's worked for me. But but the thing is, one of the things I don't like is that even though I've lost a lot of weight, I'm actually at my lowest weight since I was in high school. I'm actually at 212 right now, 212, 211. The one thing I can't stand though still is that despite all that, I still don't feel good. And I want to feel better. I want to feel like when I wake up in the morning, I don't feel as like in pain and groggy and like having to like crawl out of bed in pain. I hate that. So I need to start really stretching it before bed, stretching before I go to work, start really taking that seriously, like get back to get back to an exercise regimen was something I want to start doing, especially when my kids went to school. Wake up early in the morning, taking like jogs around the house, jogs around the my lake, or at least maybe get an exercise bike and start doing that, and really have more blood flow in my body, and start to do things of that nature to keep myself active and just prepared. I need to really work on that. So it's gonna be interesting. Next couple weeks, because I'm gonna try to start implementing some of those things as we get towards school. And I think once the kids start school in August again, my youngest goes to kindergarten for the first time. My oldest goes to fourth grade. I'm hoping by that time I'll be able to start implementing some new regimens in the morning, exercise regimens in the morning to start, make myself feel better and to really try to extend, as much as I could and just take care of myself. So we'll see how that plays out. Anyway, so recently I watched on HBO Max the George Carlin documentary which was created by Judd Apatow. It was called the George Carlin's American Dream. And it was something, I was someone that was not, I didn't grow up on George Carlin necessarily. Like I knew who he was, but when I was into comedy back when I was a kid and in stand-up comedy and all that. But and I always tell the story, that it's kind of a joke that I'm not racist. Okay, I'm not racist at all. But if there's one thing that I heavily favor my culture and my side on more than anything in the world, at least growing up that way before I opened my mind up to a lot of things, was black comedy. I always preferred black comedians over white comedians. It wasn't on purpose. It just was the way I was raised. It's like I was exposed to Eddie Murphy. I was exposed to Richard Pryor. I was exposed to, Cat Williams. I was exposed to Chris Tucker, Chris Rock, all these guys. Never really geared myself to white comedians until I got older. Now, I heard of George Carlin for years growing up as a kid, but I never really invested in him because to me he was some older guy that was telling jokes that I couldn't relate to, really, be honest with you. At least at my age at the time. And as I got older, I get in my 20s and I'm starting to become more politically astute and seeing the world in my own goggles and getting out of the church and all that to some degree and really being a little more worldly in terms of like what's out there. He was someone that kept popping up in different, segments and different, when people reference comedians, reference people who are, thinkers, even in the world of comedy, people always reference George Carlin. George Carlin's always the guy that's always you go back to. So in recent years, I've become a huge fan of his, but I never really invested time into his life, and I never really invested time into other than the few stand-ups I've listened to, his late stand-ups and late in his career. I never really invested in a lot of time in George Carlin, but I also recognize that he's one of my favorite comedians because the things he was talking about, that I, as I get into my 20s and into my 30s and now my 40s, he's talking about things that I'm into, like politics and counterculture and, just being, talk about things that actually matter and things are that are deemed controversial, but honestly are things that we should be paying attention to and things we should be respecting. So this documentary obviously broke down his entire life. It was a 2-part documentary. Both episodes are about 1:40 long, close to 2 hours long. Part 1 was basically focused on his childhood, his early start in comedy, and him doing mainstream comedy before he started becoming, tired of doing that and wanting to really become the counterculture guy. Especially in the late '60s, when during Vietnam and during the civil rights movement and all that, and becoming a voice for a lot of becoming a voice for people who didn't have a voice, whose voice was being censored and being squelched and whatnot. And then you go through, part 1 goes through that. He goes through his marriage and and how that situation was, and he had a very dysfunctional childhood, for example, and that was one of those things where, like, his dad was an alcoholic and abuser, abused his mom, abused him, and he was very, very awkward kid, very much a rebel in a lot of ways, Then in part 2 goes from like his career from the 60s and early 70s into the 80s, where his career kind of slows down. He's not finding out good work at the time, and he was thinking about hanging it up. And then he gets a resurgence in the late 80s into the 90s, and then obviously his 2000s. Part 2 goes into that, and it gets into like stuff that are very very personal. George Carlin was an outlaw. He was a rebel. I mean, and one of the reasons why he wanted to do that, because that's really who he was. And when he was doing mainstream comedy back in the early 60s and whatnot, he did it for them. Obviously, he got paid for doing it, but he didn't really enjoy it as much. It didn't really what you call it, satisfy the soul, if you want to call that. So him doing his counterculture stuff really ended up being his staple, even though it became for a little while a little passe for a little while, but he went more aggressive in later in his life. I found a story of him and his wife, his first wife anyway. Very, very intriguing. His wife passed away in 1997. I believe it was cancer, I think it was, or something like that. But they stayed together a long time. They were made for each other. They had a very intriguing story, but a story that they persevered and all that. One thing I didn't know either is that George Carlin was the very first host of the very first episode of Saturday Night Live. I did not know that until this documentary. I'll tell you what, again, his work from the 80s on is my favorite. Again, more political, more aggressively counterculture. One of the big things, and this is one of the things that really impacted me, and affected me watching it too, especially, his late work, his last stand-ups in the last, like, maybe 10 years of his life, because he died in 2008. It could be perceived as dark, because he was very much into, he's very anti-government, anti-control, this is an outlaw of the highest order. And, he was anti-religion. He was, anti a lot of things. He was very critical of religion, very critical of the government and control, and, very much, a liberal, but he was a liberal in a sense where he was a liberal on things that actually really matter. He wasn't liberal and woke. He was liberal on, he was anti, he was pro fairness, in other words. And some of his work late in his career, you can be perceived as dark. Like he said, he wanted the world to blow up. He wanted people to, he was, not that they want people to die, but he came off as less sympathetic in his later years in his work, which is weird, because like you think about it, maybe he wasn't that way, but I can sense the frustration, because in a lot of ways, watching him listen to this documentary and seeing the things he was saying and doing, I can sort of relate to that frustration, because even for myself, sometimes I get so frustrated, like, where this world's going. We see things happening today. I'm not even going into the Trump stuff. That's not even has to do with that. It's the world in general. How we value money and capitalism over people. How we value things we value consumerism over empathy and things of that nature. And he was sick of that. In a lot of ways, he was saying things that made me in some ways feel uncomfortable. Someone who grew up, faith-based and a Christian. I still consider myself a Christian. Not as my last name, but also as a Christian, as a someone that believes in God and just the high power and all that. But I have questions about religion myself too. And he's saying things that makes me think. He's saying things that in one way I'm like, wow, I feel uncomfortable. But then at the same time, is he actually wrong what he's saying? You know what I mean? And that's what the thing that kind of threw me off, is that he's saying things that make me think. And I don't know, like, he's a voice today I know would be so relevant, even more relevant today in 2022 with everything that's going on recently. Roe v. Wade, women's rights on the line here, gun control, just things of that nature, Trump, you name it. He'd be a voice that'd be so useful in today's society. That documentary is incredible. I loved it. I came away a bigger fan of George Carlin. I came away understanding him more. And again, it got me thinking, as someone that's been, for a large part of my life, been very set in certain ways, conservative in certain ways, and very traditional in certain ways. It made me think a lot. So check it out, HBO Max, George Carlin's American Dream. Very, very good stuff, man. I really implore you guys to watch that. So we, you guys know I'm a big sports radio nut. Been for years, since age 11. My first real exposure to sports radio growing up at age 11, living in Miami, South Florida, was Hank Goldberg. Hank Goldberg was a afternoon drive time host on WQAM in Miami. He was obviously a big time handicapper, sports bettor, when they call that. A lot of people know him as that. He passed away this week, on July 4th, on his birthday, July 4th, at age 82. He was my very first exposure to sports radio. And it's funny because when I first listened to him as a kid, this is the early ages of sports radio before what we have now. Obviously, what we have now with podcasts and all these things. Hank Goldberg, was someone that I couldn't stand him growing up because he was just so mean to people, so mean to the callers. But as you get older, you start understanding that a lot of what he's doing is art. Sports radio, in a lot of ways, even though it's something trivial, sports. I mean, seriously, talking about sports and piss about sports, it's an art. And he was good at that. And he was my first exposure to sports radio. So mean. But he grew on me, though. I was listening to Dan Labertard's show this week on Tuesday, or yesterday, rather. And they were discussing Hank Goldberg and his death, because Hank Goldberg was someone that, according to Dan Labertard, really was hard on Dan when Dan was breaking into the industry. Dan Labertard was a sports writer for the Miami Herald. Hank Goldberg hated the Miami Herald. Hank Goldberg was always critical of the writers at the Miami Herald. And when he saw that Dan Labertard was trying to crack into the radio, Labertard has said on many occasions that Hank Goldberg and the people in his, his aura, what do you call that, in his area, what it would be, made it hard for him to break through. And Hank Goldberg didn't pull any punches and let him know they didn't like him. Now, the funny thing is that Hank Goldberg's co-host, Labertard's co-host, Stugatz, actually worked for Hank Goldberg as a producer for many years. And he's confirmed these things also, too. So it was very interesting to hear the radio show this week, on a podcast, I'm going to call that, and hear him reflect on how to mourn him. And, it's one of those things where, like, you want to mourn him, but you also want to be honest. Hank Goldberg didn't give a shit what people thought about him either. So in one way, I thought Labertard did what he could in the best way possible. Hank Goldberg was still appearing on TV, through CBS Sports, doing his handicapping picks. I think last time I saw him, I think it was on April. He was giving handicapping picks as recent as April and May. He looked in bad shape. Obviously, he had kidney disease and all that. But 82 years old. Rest in peace, obviously, to a legend, the guy that got me really started into this medium we now call media. You know, now mine obviously means not just sports, it's sports and everything else. But it was great. You know, I found myself this week. You know, you get older, a lot of things has passed by. Hank Goldberg in that era of sports radio, you know, Neil Rogers, who I wasn't really a fan of necessarily either, because I was too young to listen to that kind of stuff, because it was, you know, I wasn't into politics and of that nature back then anyway. But those guys were trendsetters in a market that was still relatively small for sports and whatnot. And Hank Goldberg was the first. You don't get the Levitard Show and all these other shows here without Hank Goldberg. So, rest in peace to Hank Goldberg, of course. Staying on sports radio, I just discovered recently, about a week or two ago, Mike Francesa has come back again. But this time, Mike Francesa is now on podcast, which is strange because I remember way back in 2017 when he had stopped doing his show, or 2018, whatever year it was, he stopped doing his WFAN show in New York. I remember myself and Matt McQueenie of regular guest of this podcast. Him and I are big fans of Francesa, and we were saying, you know, this is an opportunity for Francesa now to really go after the podcast form. And he never did it. Like, he'll appear on Bill Simmons' podcast, you know, once a week or once every couple weeks to do picks or whatever. But he would never really embrace the podcast form. In fact, he came back to radio for another year. He did like a show, like a half an hour, 30-minute show called Mike's On, up until the pandemic happened, and then he retired again for good. So I was then curious, like, you know, because Francesa, he still tweets every day, and he still likes to have a voice into sports, and, you know, wants to, like, kind of just have the, you know, input in what's going on in the world of sports. And I was just curious, like, you know, was he doing anything even in any form with that? And lo and behold, I look up, I go on Twitter, and something pops on my Twitter, and there he is. He has a podcast on another network. I don't remember the name of the network exactly what it's called, but the Mike Francesa podcast. From what I can see, it airs 2 or 3 times a week. He talks a lot of New York sports still, but he go national with some things. The show is about 30 to 45 minutes, sometimes shorter, so that's a little longer. It's actually a good show. I subscribe to it, of course, and, you know, it's good seeing Francesa back. I mean, look, he's one of those guys, one of those surly guys again, like Hank Goldberg. But, you know, as much as I love the new media, and I'll talk about new media in the future, I still like to keep a hold of the older media, you know, the Mike and the Mad Dog, and, you know, some of those guys that are still trying to keep relevance today, you know, even though they're no longer the big kids or the big guys on the block anymore. They're still trying to keep some relevance. And again, this is why I was surprised Francesa never really got into the podcast earlier than he did, because the podcast gave him a chance to have his own corner, you know, have his fans who are into his show to hear his comments and hear his takes on sports and other things and whatnot. I mean, he came in, he limped in a little late though, but I guess better late than never. So good to hear Francesa back on the air. I'm really enjoying this podcast, and yeah, that's about it. Another thing I was checking out this week, I watched not the whole thing, but I watched a good chunk of NPR performance by Usher. Usher, you guys know what Usher is. I mean, you gotta know what Usher is. Usher Raymond, very, very popular R&B entertainer. You name it. He made an appearance on the some NPR show. Did an unplugged performance on some of his biggest hits. He's getting memed like crazy on it. He had a great performance. Obviously, I watched part of it. But it got me thinking too. Also with Usher, like, he hasn't really been in the forefront of pop culture, of music, especially too, in quite a while. Probably in about, I would say, 15 years. I think the last time I really heard Usher really in a really relevant way was probably in the late 2000s. I'm not saying he hasn't released any music since then. I'm not saying he hasn't done stuff, but you don't really hear him in the front. You don't hear him as one of the lead dogs in music. Like, he obviously in the mid 2000s the early mid 2000s was dominant. You know, doing the 8701 album in 2001. Confessions was a huge hit. and all that. And he was put on hit after hit for a good while. And then after 2009, 2010, he just kind of disappeared, really on the, at least on the mainstream front. And so it's good to see, him back performing, and actually doing it also in a very different setting, doing it in an unplugged setting. It got me thinking too also, like some of the greatest entertainers we've had in the last 20 years or even 25 years. We talk about Michael Jackson being the greatest of all time, and that, obviously know how I feel about that, obviously. I remember people saying for a long time, for the last decade or so, that Justin Timberlake was the next Michael and whatnot. We've heard Neo, Chris Brown. And I'm like, no one mentioned Usher in the last couple of years. And that's what I'm saying. Like, Usher not being a mainstream, people have just kind of forgotten about Usher. I'm like, how are you going to tell me that Justin Timberlake is better than Usher? Usher is a better singer, for crying out loud, and a better performer / dancer than Justin. Like, to put Justin on a tier close to Michael, for example, I mean, that's ridiculous in itself. But I don't even consider Justin on the Usher tier, for crying out loud. And to me, that bothered me. It's like, y'all forgot about Usher, didn't y'all? Usher, first off, Usher sold more records. I'm not saying sales matter in terms of like the overall talent, but Usher has made a much bigger impact on music, in my opinion, than Justin Timberlake. Justin Timberlake is very popular. I'm not knocking Justin Timberlake at all. I mean, obviously, stuff doing NSYNC, and then he's done a couple of good records. But even Justin, to some degree, has kind of went down a little bit off the radar the last 5-6 years. Folks forgot about Usher, man. Folks forgot. And this performance, I watched the performance, I'm like, this dude still got it. How are you going to put Justin in this guy's category? Like, I admire Chris Brown as a performer. Obviously, personal issues aside, Chris Brown's a fantastic performer. But if you talk about well-rounded performers in the last 20 years, I find it hard to believe to put people. I feel like Usher is the guy that gets disrespected the most. It bothers me. It really does bother me. So, watch that NPR performance. I can't remember the name of the performance exactly was called, but it's on NPR. It came out last week, Friday. Fantastic, unplugged. So, finally, before I go, white noise. So, I never even knew a white noise machine existed until my adulthood, and it was something I never considered. I never had a problem falling asleep. I want to sleep, not an issue, but it would be. Then I became a parent in 2013, and my oldest son, when we were trying to teach him how to sleep and soothe himself, he's just sleeping. So we got him a white noise machine as a baby, and that became a staple in our household, because even though he stayed in his room with a white noise machine, we would still have the speaker or the walkie-talkie, and the noise would travel through my room, or our room, me and my wife's. So naturally, I got used to that, and to the point where he was using the white noise machine up until age 6, age 7. Then we had a second kid, of course, 4 years later, and he also ended up using the white noise machine because he ended up wanting it also too. So I've been using the white noise machine now for about close to 10 years now, between two kids. Okay? So recently we started, we've gotten aggressive again with our youngest kid, because he's been in our bed for the last pretty much the entire life. We tried last year to get him out of bed. It worked for a couple of weeks, and then he said, nah, he wants to sleep with us again. The last couple of weeks we've been getting him into his own bed, finally. We've been really aggressive. He started kindergarten in August, so we're trying to get all these little things done before he starts school again. So we forced him pretty much into his own bed. But what we did though is we put the white noise machine that we had in our room into his room, into the boys' room rather, because they share a room. And all of a sudden, I start having sleeping issues, because the room would be silent and there's no noise in the room at all. So I'm like, now I can't sleep. So there was a couple of nights where I couldn't sleep at all. So recently, my wife and I, because we were going to buy another machine, But what we did as a stopgap for the time being is that I ended up using there's a what's it called on YouTube? I'm gonna look it up right now, quick. It's a brown sound that she told me to look up on YouTube, which I started using last week or so. Let me see if I can find it right here. Give me one quick second. It's called. This is quick. Let me see. It's called Smooth Brown Noise, and basically someone named Jason Lewis basically uploaded 12 hours of smooth brown noise, which is almost basically a white noise. So the nights he's been sleeping in his room, which is it's been for the most part okay. He still comes in our room like in the middle of the night, like 3, 4 in the morning. I think it was 2 nights where he actually slept the entire night in that room, without an issue. But not having a white noise for myself now, I got so used to having to having a white noise machine in my room now that I'm now missing it. So now I'm using my cell phone now and use this brown noise a sound on my phone to sleep with, and it's actually helped me to some degree. I can't believe this. Like, this is crazy. Like, for 30-something years, I had no problem sleeping without a white noise machine. All of a sudden, I have 2 kids, and now I need it in my life. And now all of a sudden, the silence bothers me now. It's crazy. It's really crazy. So, so we're actually gonna get a new white noise machine in the near future. I don't know. I don't know if I really want that though, because I know my wife. We're trying to get to the point where like none of us needs that. But at the same time, if it helps you sleep, it helps you sleep. You know what I'm saying? So it's not really a bad thing necessarily either. I think the white noise machine, honestly, for me, at least today now, it's been very comforting for me. I don't know why. It's weird. So anyway, that will do it for today's podcast. Dated, of course, July 6th, 2022, although July 7th is about 9 minutes away. So lots of podcasts this week. You know, I did this episode with David Mill, Miami Heat podcaster for Locked On Heat, earlier in the week. This one, of course, and then another one dropping later on today. Again, I'm on Twitter, Each7. Check out me on YouTube, Ernest Christian on YouTube. And I guess that's it for now. Till then, we will talk soon. Stay up. Have a good weekend. Have a good week, whatever. Stay up. And I'm just still on tape, play my music. You know what I'm saying? So, later, guys. Love you guys. Take care. See you.